A poor girl saves a boy in a wheelchair from being run over. She gets hurt and cries. "I only did what I wished I could have done for my brother." The young billionaire thanks her in tears. "You saved my son," but is stunned when he recognizes her face. The autumn sun shone on the small town, turning the fallen leaves into golden carpets. It was a Wednesday morning like any other. Children ran to school, hurried adults checked their watches, and the world went on at its usual pace. Nobody imagined that, in less than an hour, certain lives would become irrevocably intertwined. Sophie Rogers, age 5, was skipping along the sidewalk with her purple backpack. Her brown hair was tied in 2 uneven braids, her own attempt at doing her hair that morning, since Rachel, her mother, had left for work before dawn. Her red sneakers were untied, and she had her jacket draped casually over one arm, yet none of that dampened her enthusiasm. She hummed a made-up tune as she hopped over the cracks in the concrete, heading for the elementary school just 2 blocks away. On the opposite corner, Jack Thompson waited in his wheelchair while his father, Michael, spoke with the school principal at the building's entrance. Though only 5 years old, he already carried experiences that far exceeded those of many adults. His watchful eyes followed the other children running around the yard, a blend of curiosity and apprehension in his gaze. It was his first day at this new school. Michael had postponed this moment as long as he could, but Jack's therapist insisted he needed to return to school, to have friends and normalcy. The accident that had confined him to a wheelchair had happened nearly a year ago, and it was time to move forward. "Wait here just a minute, Jack. I'll grab your forms from the car," Michael said, pointing to the vehicle parked a few yards away. "Don't move, okay?" Jack nodded, clutching the strap of his brand new backpack. Michael walked toward the car, distracted by a phone call he had just received. An unknown number sashing, but it could be the office. He answered swiftly, focusing on the conversation. What happened next came too fast for anyone to react. A delivery driver, trying to maneuver his van while checking the address on his phone, lost control and jumped the curb. The vehicle sped directly toward Jack, who sat frozen in fear in his wheelchair. Sophie, crossing the street on her way to school, was the only one who saw the danger. "Watch out," she shouted, but her childish voice barely rose above the street noise. Without a second thought, Sophie ran like she had never run before. Her small feet hit the asphalt with surprising force, her heart pounding in her chest. In a final burst of speed, she reached Jack and pushed his wheelchair out of the van's path, which just grazed the spot where he had been seconds earlier. The effort and momentum caused Sophie to lose her balance. She fell hard against the curb, her right arm bending at an impossible angle as she tried to break the fall. A cry of pain escaped her lips. Michael dropped the phone. The sound of the horn, the brakes, and the high-pitched scream made him turn around in panic. The world seemed to slow as he saw Jack safe, but a small girl lying near the curb, clutching her arm in pain. "Oh my God!" Michael ran to Sophie, kneeling beside her. "Are you okay? Can you hear me?" Sophie bit her lip, holding back tears. Her arm throbbed, but she nodded slightly. Michael quickly checked for other serious injuries. Accelerated heartbeat, rapid breathing. The arm was clearly broken, but there was no external bleeding. Jack approached in his wheelchair, eyes wide with worry. "She saved me, Dad," he said, his voice trembling. "The van was going to hit me." The van's driver also hurried over, looking pale and terrified. I swear I didn't see the wheelchair," he stammered. "The girl just appeared out of nowhere." "Call an ambulance," Michael ordered, never taking his eyes off Sophie, who was starting to turn pale with pain. "No need for an ambulance," Sophie muttered, trying to sit up. "I have to go to school." Michael almost smiled at her determination. "I'll take you to the hospital myself," he decided, gently picking her up so as not to move her injured arm. "It's faster. Jack's coming with us." In the emergency room of the town's hospital, Sophie remained stoically quiet. Sitting on a gurney, she stared at the white walls while waiting to be seen by a doctor. Jack, in his wheelchair, stayed beside her the entire time. "What's your name?" he finally asked. "Sophie," she answered, a small smile appearing despite the pain. Yours? Jack, why did you save me? The direct question, so typical of children, made Michael look up from the form he was filling out. He wondered the same thing. The little girl's courage astounded him. Not many adults would have reacted that way, let alone a 5-year-old. Sophie shrugged, a surprisingly grown-up gesture. I saw the van was going to hurt you, she said simply. I had to do something. When the doctor finally arrived and began examining Sophie's arm, she closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. Tears threatened to fall, but she resisted bravely. This might hurt a little, but we need to take an X-ray, the doctor explained gently. Sophie nodded, biting down hard on her lower lip. The doctor turned to Michael. Are you her father? No, she saved my son from being hit and got hurt in the process, Michael explained. I haven't been able to reach her parents yet. During the X-ray, while Sophie was alone with the technician, Michael stepped out to call his office and explain his absence. Jack never took his eyes off the door Sophie had gone through. Is she going to be okay, Dad? Yes, she will. Thanks to her, you're safe. We owe her a lot. Jack nodded thoughtfully, spinning one of his wheelchair's wheels back and forth. When the doctor confirmed the fracture and began preparing the cast, Sophie finally spoke more than a few words. The local anesthetic took away most of the pain, and maybe that was why she relaxed a bit. My brother got hurt once too, she told Jack, who listened intently. But it was worse. Michael, signing the authorization for the procedure, paid close attention. There was something in the girl's voice, a shadow that didn't match her 5 years. What happened to your brother? Jack asked. Sophie looked out the window before responding. He went to heaven, she said quietly. We were playing, and the ball rolled into the street. He ran after it. I yelled, but it didn't help. Heavy silence followed. Michael felt a lump in his throat. The doctor exchanged a quick glance with the nurse. Jack reached out and took Sophie's hand. I only did what I wished I could have done for my brother, Sophie murmured, so softly that Michael almost didn't hear her. But he did hear. And those simple words echoed in his heart like a bell. There, in that phrase whispered by a 5-year-old, lay a truth so profound it left him breathless. Michael took a step back, leaning against the wall. It felt like something inside him was opening, a door that had been locked for a long time. After the procedure, with Sophie's arm freshly cast and bandaged, Michael got her address. He took her home, with Jack insisting on coming along. At the small apartment in a modest neighborhood, no one answered the door. A neighbor, hearing the knocks, came out into the hallway. Looking for Rachel? Asked the elderly woman with gray hair. She won't be back until evening. She works all day. Michael briefly explained what had happened. The neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, previously Sierra Martinez, was very helpful. Of course I can look after Sophie. I watch her whenever Rachel needs help. I'll call her as soon as possible. Michael helped Sophie into the apartment, made sure she was comfortable on the couch, and left water and the medication prescribed by the doctor. Jack waved goodbye timidly, promising to come back to play when she was better. Before leaving, Michael handed his card to Mrs. Johnson. Please ask her mother to call me. I want to help in any way I can, and thank her personally for what Sophie did. Back at his car, Michael helped Jack get in and folded up the wheelchair. He started the engine, then sat there for a moment, looking at the simple building where he had just left Sophie. Her words still reverberated in his mind. I only did what I wished I could have done for my brother. Without knowing why, he felt that his life had just changed forever. The clock on the small kitchen wall read nearly 9 at night when Rachel finally turned the key in the lock. Her shoulders ached after 12 hours walking around selling homemade cakes out of a heavy basket. The smell of sugar and cinnamon still clung to her clothes, mixed with the sweat of a long day. All she wanted was a hot shower and to lie down with Sophie to read a bedtime story, the only moment in the day she truly felt at peace. Sophie, I'm home, she called, dropping her worn bag on the hook by the door. Mrs. Johnson appeared in the hallway leading to the bedrooms, pressing a finger to her lips for silence. Rachel's heart immediately sped up. Mrs. Johnson never stayed this late unless... "What happened?" Rachel asked in a low, tense voice. "Sophie had an accident today, dear," Mrs. Johnson said, holding Rachel's hands, her wrinkled face full of concern. "She's fine, but she broke her arm. She's sleeping now." Rachel didn't wait for more explanation. She rushed to the small bedroom she shared with her daughter. Sophie lay in the narrow bed, her right arm in a cast resting on her chest. Her face was peaceful, her long lashes casting shadows on her flushed cheeks. Rachel sat on the edge of the bed, lightly brushing the girl's hair. Fear washed over her in a wave, making her tremble. For a moment, it was as if the past returned. Hospital rooms, beeping machines, the smell of antiseptics. Ben. No, she couldn't think about that now. "What exactly happened?" she asked, returning to the living room where Mrs. Johnson was waiting. The neighbor told her what she knew: an accident near the school. Sophie saving a boy from being run over, a man, the boy's father, taking her to the hospital and then bringing her home. "He left his phone number," Mrs. Johnson said, handing Rachel a piece of paper. "He asked you to call. Says he wants to help with medical expenses." Rachel took the paper but didn't even look at the number on it. Something unsettling stirred in her chest. "I tried to find you in the places you usually sell your cakes, but I couldn't," Mrs. Johnson went on. "I gave Sophie the pain meds the doctor prescribed. She had some soup and then went to sleep." "Thank you for taking care of her," Rachel said, hugging the neighbor, tears threatening to fall. "I don't know what I'd do without you." After Mrs. Johnson left, Rachel took a quick shower, changed clothes, and went back to the bedroom. Sophie was awake and looking at the doorway, as if she knew her mother was coming. "Mom," she called, still sounding sleepy. She tried to sit up but winced when she moved her arm. Rachel hurried over to help her. "Easy, my love. You need to keep your arm still so it can heal." Seated on the bed with Sophie curled up at her side, Rachel took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "Mrs. Johnson told me you got hurt today. Can you tell me what happened?" Sophie nodded, her eyes suddenly bright. "There was a boy in a wheelchair, Mom. He was waiting for his dad near the school," she explained, gesturing with her good arm. "Then a van came really fast and jumped the curb. It was going to hit him. I ran and pushed his chair away. Just like superheroes do in the movies." Rachel felt her stomach drop. The image was too vivid, too frightening. "I fell and hurt my arm," Sophie went on, pointing to the cast with a touch of pride. "But Jack's okay. He's my age." "Jack," Rachel repeated, stroking her daughter's hair. "Yeah, his wheelchair is super cool. His dad took me to the hospital. He was really nice to me, Mom. He bought me ice cream while we waited for the doctor." Rachel tried to process it all. Sophie was always impulsive, always ready to help, to jump in. Just like her father, Rachel thought involuntarily, and quickly pushed the idea away. Now wasn't the time for memories. "What's his father like?" Rachel asked, trying to sound casual. "He's tall," Sophie answered, raising her good arm as if to show his height. "He has dark hair, and he wears fancy clothes, like a suit. He speaks softly, but he's kind." Rachel felt a strange chill. That description could fit any businessman in town. It didn't mean anything. "Did he tell you his name? Do you remember?" Sophie furrowed her brow, trying hard to recall. "I'm not sure. I don't think he said. Jack kept asking me to play, and I didn't pay attention." She let out a big yawn. "He said he'd come back to see how I'm doing. Can we invite Jack to play here?" Rachel forced a smile, despite her uneasiness. "Maybe when your arm is better." "He looked sad when I mentioned Ben," Sophie said, her voice slowing as sleep crept back. "I told him I tried to save Jack the way I couldn't save Ben." Rachel froze. The air seemed to vanish from the room. They rarely spoke about Ben. It was a wound that had never really healed. "What did he say when you told him about your brother?" Rachel asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Sophie yawned again, her eyes nearly closed. "He went quiet. Then he hugged me and said I was really brave. Jack hugged me too, she said, smiling at the memory. I think we're friends now. Rachel kissed her daughter's forehead, helping her settle back into the pillows. Within minutes, Sophie was asleep again, her face relaxed, as if she had faced no danger at all that day. In the dim light of the bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, Rachel finally looked at the piece of paper she still held. The faint light from the window was enough to read the name written next to the number. Michael Thompson. It wasn't the same Michael, it couldn't be. The last name was different, for starters. And the Michael she had known so long ago certainly didn't have a child. He probably didn't even remember her anymore. Why would he? They had only spent 6 months of their lives together, nearly 10 years ago. Even so, something inside Rachel trembled. An inexplicable unease, like a premonition. The town wasn't that big. Social circles crossed paths, even among people from vastly different worlds. Like her, a single mom selling baked goods in the streets, and a man of business with polished business cards and his own car. Rachel placed the paper in the drawer of her bedside table. She decided she wouldn't call. The hospital bills were covered by insurance, and she didn't need charity, especially not from a stranger who reminded her of a past she preferred to forget. Yet as she lay down next to her daughter, trying to find the sleep that kept slipping away, a shadow of doubt remained. If this Michael returned as Sophie said he promised, Rachel would have to face him, and then she would know. In the silence of that home, the memories Rachel tried so hard to keep locked away began to surface, like water slipping through fingers. 3 days had passed since the accident. Michael tried to focus on work, but his mind kept drifting back to the little girl with uneven braids and courage far beyond her size. The words she had whispered in the hospital about her brother haunted him like a tune he couldn't stop humming. Jack wouldn't stop talking about Sophie either. During physical therapy, at dinner before bed, always the same question. Dad, when are we going to see Sophie again? Michael would adjust his reading glasses, look at his son, and give the same evasive answer. Soon, buddy. She needs to rest. The truth was that Michael also wanted to go back. He had left his number with the neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, but his phone hadn't rung. Perhaps Sophie's mother didn't want any more contact. Maybe she preferred to forget the incident and move on. Who could blame her? On the 4th day, while driving Jack home from school, the boy pointed out the window. Can we drive by her house just to see if she's okay? Michael hesitated. He didn't want to seem intrusive. But Jack looked at him with those big eyes full of hope. Just drive by, he finally agreed. He took a detour from their usual route. Michael remembered the address well. The small brick building was on a quiet street, with sparse trees lining the sidewalks and a few local shops scattered around. He parked at a discreet distance. His heart was beating strangely fast. I don't see her, said Jack, craning his neck. She's probably inside or still at school, Michael replied, already prepared to drive away. That was when Jack pointed again. There, that's her. Michael looked in the direction he indicated. Sophie was sitting on the curb outside the building, playing alone. She wore a faded blue dress, her cast resting on her lap, and she was fiddling with something small, a rag doll, perhaps. Can we go say hi? Jack asked, already fidgeting in his seat. Michael took a deep breath and turned off the engine. Just for a few minutes. We don't want to bother her. He got out, retrieved the wheelchair from the trunk and helped Jack settle into it. As they approached, Sophie looked up. For a second, she seemed confused, then her face lit up with a genuine smile. Jack, she exclaimed, jumping up. Hi, Sophie, Jack replied, just as excited. We came to see if you're okay. Michael pushed the wheelchair up onto the curb. Sophie adjusted her dress and showed off her cast. Look, everyone in class signed it, she said proudly, pointing to the colorful scribbles covering the white cast. My teacher said I'm a hero. You are, Jack agreed, his eyes shining with admiration. Michael crouched down to their level. How are you feeling, Sophie? It itches a little, she shrugged. But the doctor said that's good, it means it's healing. She spoke with a simplicity that contrasted with the maturity in her eyes. Michael couldn't help but notice how normal she seemed in so many ways, yet she carried a certain gravity no 5-year-old should have. "What were you playing?" Jack asked, pointing to the worn rag doll on the ground. "This is Lucy," Sophie said, picking up the doll carefully. "My brother gave her to me, before he went to heaven." Michael felt a pang in his chest. Jack looked at Sophie curiously. "Did your brother live with you?" he asked. "Yes," Sophie replied, sitting back down on the curb and motioning for Jack to bring his chair closer. "His name was Ben. He was older. He was 7. Michael stayed standing, simply observing. There was something almost sacred about the way children spoke to each other, so straightforward, discussing things most adults sidestepped. "What happened to him?" Jack asked quietly. Sophie smoothed her dress with her good hand, then looked up at Michael as if checking whether it was okay to talk about it. He nodded gently. "We were playing ball out here in front," she began, pointing at the small patch of grass near the curb. The ball rolled into the street. Ben ran to get it before a car came. "I saw the car and screamed he could, but he didn't hear me." The simple way she recounted the tragedy made Michael swallow hard. "I tried to run too, but I wasn't fast enough," Sophie continued, her little face now serious. "When I saw Jack almost get run over, I ran super fast. I didn't want it to happen again." Jack reached out and held Sophie's hand, an instinctive, pure gesture. The two children were quiet for a moment. "Is your mom home?" Michael asked at last, glancing at the windows of the building. Sophie shook her head. "She sells cakes. She makes them at night, then goes out to sell them during the day. She only gets back when it's dark." Again, the natural way she described her routine without self-pity or drama impressed Michael. "Who looks after you during the day?" "I go to school in the morning. Then Mrs. Johnson checks in on me to make sure I'm okay, but I can take care of myself," she said proudly. "I can heat up food in the microwave and everything." Michael regarded the girl with a mixture of admiration and concern. So young yet so independent, out of necessity, not choice. "You know what my mom makes best?" Sophie asked, suddenly excited. "Chocolate cake with frosting. She always saves me a piece, even when she sells out." "I love chocolate cake," Jack exclaimed. "Maybe one day you can try it, if my mom says it's okay for you to come here," Sophie said, then looked at Michael. "Could you bring Jack to play with me when my arm is better?" Michael smiled, touched by the simple request. "Of course, if your mom allows it." He checked his watch. It was getting late, and he didn't want to overstep his bounds. "We need to go, Jack. Sophie needs to rest." Jack made a disappointed face, but didn't protest. "When are we coming back?" he asked. "Soon," Michael promised, taking a piece of paper from his pocket and writing down his number. "Sophie, could you give this to your mom? Tell her we're happy to help with anything she needs." Sophie took the paper and put it in the pocket of her dress. "She works a lot," the little girl said with a small sigh. "But I'll tell her." As they said goodbye, Sophie followed them to the car, waving with her good arm while Michael helped Jack back into the vehicle. Before closing the door, Jack called out, "Sophie, thanks for saving me." She just smiled and shrugged, as if she had done nothing special. Michael started the car and pulled away slowly. In the rearview mirror, he saw Sophie still standing on the curb, hugging her rag doll with her one free arm, watching the car until it turned the corner. Something about that sight stayed with him. That small girl, alone on the curb, radiating a quiet strength that seemed to outsize the entire world around her. A week after the accident, Michael tried to return to his normal routine. Meetings, issuing reports, calls. The hectic pace at the office should have occupied his mind completely. Yet he couldn't shake the image of Sophie sitting on the curb with her arm in a cast. It crept into his thoughts at the most unexpected times. During an important video conference, he found himself doodling a little rag doll in the margins of his notes. At lunchtime, he saved a piece of chocolate cake, thinking Sophie would like it. And every night, when he tucked Jack into bed, his son would ask about her. "Can we visit Sophie tomorrow?" It was always the same question, and Michael no longer had any excuse to delay. "Her mum still hasn't called, son," he would answer, feeling strangely disappointed. Jack frowned in thought. "Maybe she lost your number?" Michael would smile, ruffling his son's hair. "Maybe." But deep down, he knew better. There was something else at play: Sophie's mother's reluctance to reach out, the way the little girl described her life alone after school, the old sadness in her eyes that no child her age should carry. On a Friday, Michael left work early, telling his secretary he had personal matters to attend to. He drove around the city aimlessly for almost an hour, as if seeking an excuse. Finally, he steered in the direction of Sophie's neighborhood, without fully admitting it to himself. He parked discreetly 2 blocks away from the small building. Turning off the engine, he stayed inside the car. What was he doing? What right did he have to meddle in that family's life? Jack wasn't even with him this time. He had no justification for this visit, yet still he remained. The sun began to set, painting the sky orange and pink. A few children played in a small nearby park. An older man walked his dog. The street was quiet and welcoming in its simplicity, and then he saw Sophie. She came out of the building and sat on the curb, just as before, but this time she had a piece of colored chalk. With her good hand, she drew shapes on the gray sidewalk, flowers, stars, and what looked like people holding hands. Michael watched for nearly 20 minutes. There was something hypnotic about the girl's focus, the way she created a colorful world around her, alone but apparently content. As it started to grow dark, a woman turned the corner. She carried a basket covered by a white cloth, walking slowly, as if weighed down by the day's fatigue. Sophie looked up from her drawing and waved enthusiastically. The woman quickened her pace upon seeing her daughter. Even from a distance, Michael could see her tired smile. There was a natural grace in her movements, a certain elegance that clashed with her simple clothes and the heavy basket she carried. Sophie sprang to her feet and ran to her mother, wrapping her arms around the woman's legs and excitedly talking about something Michael couldn't hear. The woman set down the basket and gently touched Sophie's face. Her back was to him, but something about the tilt of her neck and the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. A chill ran down his spine. Could it be? The woman picked up the basket again and stood. Sophie took her hand, and the two headed toward the building. Before going in, the woman turned slightly to look down the street. For a second, so brief it could have been his imagination, Michael caught a glimpse of her profile. His heart raced. It was like seeing a ghost he knew all too well. He waited another 10 minutes in the car, trying to organize his thoughts. Could it be a coincidence, a casual resemblance, or was it truly her? He had to find out. Driven by a force he couldn't explain, Michael got out of the car and walked to the building. His courage nearly deserted him when he stood at the door, but the image of Sophie saving Jack gave him strength. He owed that little girl, owed her gratitude, owed her honesty, owed far more than he could yet imagine. He took a deep breath and knocked softly. The sound echoed in his own ears, amplified by anxiety. Footsteps approached from the other side. The doorknob turned, and there she was. Time stopped. The years fell away. Michael felt himself transported to another place, another moment. She was different, some fine lines around her eyes, shorter hair, a slimmer face. But the eyes, her eyes were the same ones that had looked at him with so much love all those years ago, the same ones that had shed tears when he left. "Rachel?" He breathed the word more than spoke it. She froze. Her face went pale, revealing her shock. She took a step back instinctively, as if seeing something that frightened her. "Michael?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. The silence that followed had weight, a texture all its own. So many years, so many words left unsaid, so many paths traveled in different directions. And now here they were, face to face, connected by a child they hadn't even known existed in each other's world. Michael broke the silence first. He had to say something, anything, to anchor the moment in reality. "I'm the father of the boy your daughter saved," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I didn't know. I came to say thank you and offer any help you might need to make sure Sophie is okay." Rachel still looked at him as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Slowly, the surprise on her face gave way to a more controlled expression. She took a steadying breath, squaring her shoulders. "Thank you for everything you did for her," she finally said, her voice now firm. "It was a huge scare, but she's fine." She looked directly into his eyes, with an intensity that reminded him of how she had always been. Straightforward, no beating around the bush. "We don't need anything, Michael." "Really?" Michael felt the impact of those words, not because of what they said, but how they were said, with finality, with distance. "Rachel, please," he hesitated, trying to find the right words. "I'm not here to stir up the past. I just want to repay what your daughter did for my son." Her expression closed off even more. Without another word, Rachel stepped back and shut the door. The sound of the door closing echoed through the empty corridor. Michael stood there, motionless, staring at the cold, impersonal wood that now separated him from her, from the girl, from the answers he didn't even realize he was seeking. He took a deep breath, feeling his chest tighten with emotions he thought he had buried long ago. Slowly, he turned and walked back toward the street, to his car, and to his neatly arranged life. But he knew nothing would ever be the same again. The past now had a name and an address. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:27 a.m., the red numbers glowing in the dark. Michael was sitting in the armchair by the window, gazing at the moon through partially open curtains. He hadn't been able to sleep. He hadn't even been able to close his eyes for more than a few minutes without Rachel's face appearing in his mind. Rachel, after all these years. He stood, unable to remain still. He walked down the dark hallway to the living room, turning on only a small lamp that cast a warm yellow glow. Jack slept in the room next door, and Michael could hear his son's steady breathing through the slightly open door. He crouched before a bookshelf and pulled out a box hidden behind the bottom row. It was made of dark wood, with a small golden lock. The key was tucked away in a book no one but him ever touched, a collection of poetry Rachel had given him as a gift. His hands trembled slightly as he turned the tiny key. The first thing he saw upon opening the box was a photo, him and Rachel, smiling, sitting on the edge of a lake. She wore a straw hat, her long hair blowing in the wind. He had his arm around her waist, looking at her like she was the only person in the world, because at that moment, she was... Michael picked up the photo carefully, noting how the edges had yellowed. "How did this happen?" he murmured to himself, still unable to believe the coincidence. How could Sophie be her daughter? How did her daughter end up saving my son? He continued rummaging through the box. There were letters, movie tickets, a handkerchief embroidered with her initials that he had never returned, tiny fragments of a story that felt like it belonged to another life. A story cut short. He closed his eyes, letting the memories come. The day he met Rachel, working part-time at a coffee shop while finishing college, her smile each time he ordered the same coffee, just to see her. Their first date at the park, the first night they spent together. Then came the other side of the coin, the look on his father's face when Michael told him about her. A girl with no name, no family, no future. The veiled threats about his inheritance, his place in the family business. The impossible choice he had to make. His last argument with Rachel still echoed in his mind, even after all these years. "You never believed in what we had, Michael. You were never strong enough to fight for us." And she was right. He chose the safe path, the expected path. He married Catherine, the daughter of one of his father's business partners. A gentle, beautiful, appropriate woman. They had Jack, and for a while he convinced himself that he was happy, until the accident that took Catherine's life and left Jack paralyzed. Michael stood abruptly, returning the photo to the box. Catherine's death had nothing to do with Rachel. They were separate stories, separate lives. He couldn't mix them. But Sophie, seeing Sophie felt like looking into the past. She had those same expressive eyes, that same determined chin, that same impulsive courage, that same natural kindness. It was like seeing Rachel in miniature. What if, he began talking to himself, running a hand nervously through his hair. What if it's not just coincidence? What if it's something more? Michael was not a superstitious man. He didn't believe in fate or invisible forces moving the pieces of our lives. But how else to explain that, out of all the children in the world, Rachel's daughter had saved his son? How else to explain that their paths had crossed again in this way, after so many years and so many choices driving them apart? He went back to the window, watching the sky start to lighten. Dawn was coming, and with it, a decision. He couldn't undo the past. He couldn't erase the pain he had caused or felt, but now he could make a different choice. This wasn't about winning Rachel back or reviving what they once had. It was about doing the right thing, about thanking the girl who saved his son, about helping a woman who was clearly struggling to raise her daughter alone, about not running away this time. Something in his chest settled with that resolve, like a long-locked door finally opening to let in fresh air. When Jack woke up, Michael had already showered and prepared breakfast. The boy looked at his dad curiously as he settled in at the kitchen table. "You seem different today, Dad," he said, grabbing a piece of toast. Michael smiled as he poured orange juice for his son. "Different how?" Jack shrugged, chewing thoughtfully. "I don't know. Less sad, I think." The comment caught him off guard. He hadn't realized his melancholy was so visible, even to a 5-year-old. "I was thinking we could visit Sophie today," Michael said casually. Jack's eyes lit up. "Really? Can we?" Michael nodded, sitting down across from him. "Yes, if she and her mum will let us." "Sophie will be so happy," Jack exclaimed, almost spilling his juice. "Can I bring my new book to show her?" "Sure." While Jack chatted excitedly about all the toys he wanted to bring for Sophie, Michael felt a sense of calm he hadn't experienced in a long time. He didn't know what he would find. He didn't know if Rachel would open the door, if she would let him get closer, or accept anything from him. But he knew he had to try. He couldn't let fear paralyze him again. He couldn't repeat the mistakes of the past. This time would be different. That morning, as he helped Jack get ready, Michael made a silent promise to himself. He wouldn't run away anymore. He would go back to that simple home, respectfully, without expectations. He would try again to build some kind of bridge over the chasm he had created so many years before. Not for himself, not for some romantic fantasy or nostalgia, but for Jack, who had been smiling more since meeting Sophie. For Sophie, who had saved his son with courage beyond her years. And for everything that had stayed silent, unspoken, and unlived for far too long. The sky was clear on that Saturday morning. Golden light flooded Michael's apartment as he helped Jack get dressed. The boy could hardly sit still, fidgeting as his father pulled a t-shirt over his head. "Careful with my arm, Dad," Jack warned when Michael tried to slide the sleeve too quickly. "Sorry, buddy. I'm a bit clumsy today." The truth was, Michael felt nervous. His usually steady hands trembled slightly. The idea of seeing Rachel again, after the way their last encounter ended, made him anxious. But Jack was so excited that Michael couldn't change his mind now. "We're going to see Sophie, right, Dad?" Jack asked, eyes shining with anticipation as Michael tied his sneakers. Michael smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "Yes, we are. But only if she wants us there." "She will. Sophie likes me," Jack stated, with the unshakable certainty only children possess. Michael finished getting Jack ready and went to get the wheelchair. Jack had learned to transfer from the bed to the chair on his own, but still needed help with clothes and shoes. His independence grew with each passing day, despite his limitations. "I brought a book for her," Jack said, pointing to his backpack hanging on the wheelchair. "And my race cars," "That's very nice of you, son." As Michael drove towards Sophie's neighborhood, he tried to gather his thoughts. What would he say to Rachel? How would he explain coming back unannounced? Part of him was afraid of being met with the same coldness. But another part hoped, just maybe, she'd be more receptive this time. He parked the car a short distance from Rachel's place, just as before. He didn't want to seem overbearing. He helped Jack down and unfolded the wheelchair. "What if Sophie isn't home?" Jack asked, sounding a bit worried. "Then we'll come back another day," Michael replied, pushing the wheelchair along the sidewalk. But Sophie was there, sitting in the same spot as before, on the curb in front of the small building. She wore a faded green dress with paint stains, and her cast was now even more decorated with colorful signatures. She was drawing a make-believe world on the sidewalk with bright chalk. When she looked up and saw Jack approaching, her face lit up like a tiny sun. "Jack!" she exclaimed, jumping to her feet. "Sophie!" Jack responded with the same enthusiasm. Michael stopped the wheelchair a few feet away. Sophie ran up to them, her eyes flicking between Jack and Michael, as if checking whether it was okay to get close. "Hi, Sophie," Michael greeted with a warm smile. "How's your arm doing?" She shrugged like it was no big deal. "It's better. The doctor said I'll get my cast off in 2 weeks. Jack pointed to the backpack hanging on his wheelchair. "I brought some toys. Want to see?" Sophie nodded eagerly. Within minutes, they were immersed in their own world. Jack spread his toy cars on the sidewalk, while Sophie drew a fancy racetrack in chalk. They laughed, made up rules, and argued playfully about who was winning. Michael sat under a nearby tree, watching them with a reserved smile. There was something magical about how easily children formed bonds and how simple their friendship was. No complications, no emotional baggage, no weight from the past. Jack showed Sophie how to make the cars go faster, and she taught him how to draw tunnels and obstacles on the chalk track. Occasionally, they broke into bursts of laughter so genuine it made Michael smile unconsciously. After a while, Sophie left Jack to arrange the cars for a new race and walked over to Michael. Her hands were covered in colorful chalk dust, which she wiped on the hem of her dress. "My mom was really mad that day," she said quietly, looking at Michael with a seriousness that seemed out of place on her small face. Michael leaned forward slightly, giving her his full attention. "After I left?" he asked gently. Sophie nodded, fidgeting with the edge of her cast. I didn't understand why. Her eyes filled up with water, but she said she wasn't crying. She said she was just tired. Sophie frowned, as though recalling the scene. But she did cry. I heard her in the bathroom. Michael felt a lump form in his throat. He pictured Rachel crying in secret, trying to hide her pain from her child, and it made his chest tighten. "Sometimes grown-ups get scared, Sophie," he said carefully. "We don't want to show it, but we feel afraid too." Sophie looked at him with those eyes that seemed far older than 5 years. "Did you know my mom before?" she asked pointedly. The question caught him off guard. He considered lying, saying no, that he'd only met her when he brought Sophie home from the hospital. But something in the girl's earnest gaze stopped him. "Yes," he answered simply, "a long time ago." Sophie nodded, as if that confirmed something she had already suspected. "I thought so," she said. "You both acted weird." Michael almost smiled at her keen observation. Before he could respond, Sophie was already running back to Jack, who was calling her to see a super jump he managed with one of the cars. Michael watched them play. Jack seemed like a different child, happier, more talkative, more alive. And Sophie, even with a broken arm, moved with a contagious energy as they made up storylines for each race. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and Michael realized they'd have to leave soon. Jack's physical therapy was scheduled for the afternoon, and he didn't want to overstay his welcome, uninvited. But something inside him resisted leaving. Here, on a simple sidewalk, with children playing and the adult world momentarily forgotten, he felt a peace he hadn't felt in a long time. As if sensing his gaze, Sophie looked up and smiled at him, an open, unreserved smile, The same kind of smile Rachel once had, back when he hadn't hurt her, back when he hadn't chosen the safe path over the right one. Michael smiled back, feeling a certainty bloom inside him. He was in the right place now, finally. And even if Rachel kept her distance and the past couldn't be undone, something new was growing here. In the children's friendship, in these mornings of play, in their exchanged smiles, a fragile start, but a real one. The sun was beginning to set when Rachel finally turned onto her street. Her shoulders ached, and the empty basket she carried felt heavier than it had in the morning, when it was full of cakes. She had sold everything, which meant it had been a good day, but her body protested after hours of walking, offering her baked goods door to door and at local businesses. Her calloused hands, marked by constant work, mechanically straightened the hair pinned in a simple bun. She thought of Sophie, of the hot bath she would take, and of watching that cartoon her daughter loved, her one moment of true rest. That's when she saw them. Rachel stopped in the middle of the sidewalk as if she'd run into an invisible wall. A few yards away, Sophie was happily playing with a boy in a wheelchair in front of their building. Their laughter echoed across the quiet street. Sitting under a tree nearby, watching them with a gentle smile, was Michael. The scene hit her like a wave. For a brief and painful moment, Rachel didn't see Jack in the wheelchair. She saw Ben. Ben, her older child who used to love playing with Sophie in this same spot. Ben, whose laughter no longer filled her home after the accident. Ben, whose small body rested beneath a simple headstone in the cemetery on the far side of town. Rachel's breath caught. A cold surge of longing flooded her, making her eyes sting with unshed tears. Sophie was laughing just like she had laughed with Ben, that pure, untroubled laugh Rachel feared she'd never hear again. She took a deep breath, trying to pull herself together. She couldn't let Sophie see her upset. The girl was finally regaining a bit of the joy she'd lost after Ben's tragedy. Now she was playing with another child, forging a new bond, taking steps forward. Rachel refused to be the weight that dragged her back into grief. Part of her wanted to smile at seeing her daughter so happy. Another part wanted to run over, grab Sophie's hand and pull her inside, away from Michael, away from the memories, away from the past that just wouldn't stay gone. But she did what she always did. She kept going. She walked forward slowly, the basket swaying on her arm. Sophie spotted her first. Her face lit up even more, if that was possible. "Mom!" she yelled, running toward her in her usual hurried way, carefully hugging her cast against her chest. "Jack came to see me today. We played so much," Rachel smiled, bending down to hug her daughter. She stroked Sophie's messy hair, breathing in the scent of sunshine and childhood. "I see that, honey. Looks like you had a lot of fun." The boy, Jack, waved timidly from his wheelchair. He had a gentle look in his eyes and a hesitant smile. Rachel felt her heart tighten again. Children shouldn't suffer, she thought. Not Jack, confined to that wheelchair. Not Sophie, bearing the loss of her brother. Not Ben, who left too soon. Michael rose slowly, as if afraid of startling her. Their eyes met, and for a moment, time stood still between them. There was no hostility in his gaze, only a sort of respectful caution. "Hi, Rachel," he said in a low voice, almost as if asking permission. "Michael," she replied, keeping her own tone neutral despite the storm inside her. Sophie dashed back to Jack, showing him something drawn on the sidewalk, chalk doodles. The two resumed their animated conversation, as though the adults weren't even there. Michael took a step toward Rachel, still giving her plenty of personal space. "I only brought Jack because he missed her," he explained, hands in his pockets. A gesture she remembered from years ago when he was nervous. "If this is a bad time, I understand." Rachel watched them for another moment. Sophie, so open, so free with a boy she barely knew. Jack, and whose physical limitations didn't diminish his enthusiasm one bit. And Michael, who had returned even after she'd slammed the door in his face. Something inside her gave way, like thin ice cracking under gentle pressure. "If Sophie's okay with it, then it's fine," she finally answered, her words coming out softer than she had intended. Michael nodded, relief evident on his face, though he tried to hide it. "Jack has therapy soon, so we should get going," he said. "But maybe we could come back another day if that's all right with you both." Rachel didn't respond directly. She called Sophie, who bounded over, a whirlwind of energy, excitedly telling her mom about Jack's amazing toy cars and how they'd invented a new game. "Let's go inside, sweetie." "It's getting chilly out here," Rachel said, taking Sophie's small hand in hers. Jack waved goodbye, clearly disappointed that playtime was ending. "Bye, Sophie. We'll play more next time, okay?" "Okay," Sophie answered enthusiastically, waving with her cast. Rachel guided her daughter through the small iron gate and into the modest building. But before shutting it, she glanced back. Michael was helping Jack get back into his wheelchair, his gestures kind and patient. He looked up, and their gazes met. The cold anger from their first meeting was gone, as was the stunned shock of recognition. All that remained was a silent tension, a space between old memories and wounds not yet fully healed. Rachel held his gaze a second longer than she meant to, then quietly closed the gate and led Sophie inside, carrying her empty basket and the weight of a past that refused to stay behind. Rachel woke before the alarm. The first rays of sunlight barely slipped through the thin curtains, but her body was already on alert, as though it had never really rested. Lying in the narrow bed, she turned to look at Sophie, still sleeping soundly beside her, her cast resting over her gently rising and falling chest. The memories of the previous day lingered. Sophie and Jack playing, laughing, Michael watching. The image merged with older memories, Sophie and Ben running across the same sidewalk, inventing games, sharing secrets. Then the deafening silence after Ben was gone, when Sophie had stopped smiling for days. Rachel closed her eyes, trying to push away the ache growing in her chest. She worried about her daughter getting attached to Jack, to Michael, people who might one day vanish like Michael once did, like Ben who was gone forever. More losses that Sophie didn't deserve. "Mom? Are you awake?" Sophie's sleepy voice pulled her back to the present. Rachel turned to see her daughter's eyes open and curious. As always. "Yes, honey," she answered, smiling and brushing a lock of hair from Sophie's face. "Is Jack coming over again today?" Sophie asked, sitting up with that boundless energy only children have first thing in the morning. Rachel hesitated. She wanted to say no. She wanted to protect Sophie from more complications, but the spark in her daughter's eyes was something she hadn't seen in a long time. "I don't know, sweetheart. They didn't say anything about coming today." Sophie's face fell for a moment, but lit up again seconds later. "I'll wait on the curb then. If they pass by, they'll see me." Rachel smiled at her daughter's straightforward logic. She got up to make breakfast while Sophie chatted about the new games she and Jack had invented, adding how funny he is even though he can't walk. The morning passed calmly. Rachel had decided not to sell cakes on Sundays, her only day of rest. She did a light cleaning of the apartment, while Sophie drew pictures at the kitchen table, an old radio playing soft music in the background. It was shortly after lunch that they heard the knock at the door. Sophie dashed to answer before Rachel could stop her. "Jack," came Sophie's thrilled voice from the hallway. Rachel dried her hands on a dish towel and moved to the door. Michael stood there, pushing Jack's wheelchair, looking unsure but hopeful. Jack had a colorful book on his lap, his eyes bright with anticipation. "Sorry for dropping by unannounced," Michael said, noticing Rachel's surprised expression. "Jack insisted on bringing this book for Sophie. We can come back another time if—" "No," Sophie interrupted. "We can read it now." "Can we, Mom, please?" Rachel looked from her daughter to Michael and then at Jack's hopeful smile. She sighed softly. "All right. You can read it out front." Sophie's grin was worth any discomfort. She grabbed Jack's hand, the boy quickly handing the book to Michael and maneuvering his chair to follow her out to the small area in front of the building. Rachel stayed at the door, watching as Michael sat on the little doorstep with the children, opening the book between them. It was a story about an adventurous rabbit. Sophie and Jack leaned in to see the pictures while Michael read, changing his voice for each character and making dramatic faces that earned giggles from both kids. There was something mesmerizing about the scene. Rachel leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, just observing. Michael read with enthusiasm, but also with a noticeable gentleness. He paused to show the illustrations carefully and answered the kids' naive questions with a smile. When the story ended, the children begged for another. Michael glanced at Rachel, silently asking if it was okay. She gave a small nod. During the second story, at a moment when the characters discussed friendship, Sophie turned to Michael with a curious, unexpectedly serious expression. "Why are you so nice to us?" she asked softly, but clearly. Michael stopped reading, visibly taken aback by the question. He kept his finger on the page as a placeholder and smiled gently. "Because you're special," he said simply. "Jack wouldn't stop talking about you after the accident, and I was so grateful, even without knowing who you were." Sophie seemed to think that over. Her brow furrowed as she processed something important. "Jack reminds me of Ben," she finally said, "and my brother." Her words fell like stones in the sudden silence. Rachel, who had been quietly watching, felt her entire body tense. Hearing Ben's name out loud still hit her like a punch to the gut. Michael glanced at Rachel, noticing her reaction. He saw the tears she fought to hold back, the way her hands tightened around her arms. Jack looked from Sophie to the adults, sensing the shift but not fully understanding it. "Who's Ben?" he asked innocently. "My brother who went to heaven," Sophie answered in the same casual tone she used when talking about her broken arm. "He liked books too, and playing outside." Michael gently closed the book and signaled Jack with a small nod, letting him know they should stay quiet. He stood and moved closer to Rachel, leaving the children to talk over the book's illustrations on their own. "Rachel," he began in a low voice, "I had no idea about your son." His eyes held genuine sadness, a compassion that was more than just politeness. Rachel took a deep breath, trying to keep her emotions in check. "There's a lot you don't know, Michael," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside. "But this isn't the time to talk about it yet." He nodded, respecting her boundaries. He didn't push, didn't insist. He just sat back down on the step, this time a bit closer to the door near Rachel. To her surprise, Michael didn't resume the book. He simply stayed there, watching the children, who had discovered a tiny beetle crawling on the sidewalk and were now marveling at it. Rachel also remained where she was. The silence between them was no longer charged with hostility or resentment. It was a shared silence, almost comfortable, as though both recognized that there was too much pain to put into words at that moment. The afternoon sun enveloped the scene, the children captivated by their little discovery. Michael and Rachel sitting side by side in the doorway, only a few inches between them and a whole history of diverging paths. Yet for the first time, something else hung in the air besides tension, maybe an understanding, maybe the first step toward accepting that while the past couldn't be changed, it didn't have to dictate the present. A week went by after Michael read stories to the children. Life carried on, Rachel selling her homemade pastries, Sophie attending school, Michael working at his office, Jack going to therapy. But something had shifted, almost imperceptibly from day to day, yet profound when viewed in hindsight. Like a door, long locked, now left ajar. On a Wednesday afternoon, Michael showed up alone. Rachel was sitting on the doorstep, resting after a particularly grueling day. Sophie was at a classmate's house for a school project. Seeing him approach, Rachel showed no surprise. It was as if, somehow, she had expected him. Michael stopped a few steps away, his hands in his pockets, a gesture she still recognized. "Hi," he said simply. "Jack's not with you today?" Rachel asked, noting the boy's absence. "No, he's with the babysitter. He has a medical exam early tomorrow and needs to get some rest." Rachel nodded. She shifted slightly to the side, a silent invitation Michael understood. He moved closer and sat beside her on the step, leaving a respectful space between them. They were quiet for a few minutes, not a tense silence, but not entirely comfortable either. It was the kind of silence that feels like waiting, like preparing. The sounds of the street filled the void. Children playing ball at the other end of the block, a dog barking in the distance, the hum of a car engine passing slowly by. Rachel studied her own hands, rough from work, from the life she led. Michael looked straight ahead, as if arranging his thoughts. Rachel broke the silence first. "Do you know what hurt me the most, Michael?" she asked, her voice controlled yet thick with emotion she couldn't fully hide. "It wasn't the ending. It was that you didn't believe me." She turned slightly, enough to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears but her voice firm. "I never got close to you for money. I didn't even know who you were at first. Your family poisoned you against me, and you believed them. You left me like what we had meant nothing." Michael lowered his eyes, guilt evident on his face. But Rachel needed to keep going, needed to speak words she had held back for so long. "I felt like you never truly loved me, because if you did, you would have trusted me. But no, you just walked away." She took a shaky breath, fighting the tears threatening to fall. She didn't want to cry, not now, not over this. Michael tried to speak, but she lifted a hand, signaling him to let her finish. "After you left, I moved on with my life. I had 2 kids. Their father abandoned us. We had nothing." Her voice wavered slightly, but she steadied herself. "I worked day and night. I sold cakes on the street with a baby in my arms. I slept in rented rooms, afraid and ashamed. But even then, I kept going." Her last words came out almost as a sigh, years of silent struggles summarized in one small phrase. "I kept going." Michael stayed quiet for a moment, absorbing it all. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Rachel, I've changed. I'm not the same man who left, and I don't want to disappear from your life or Sophie's. Jack really likes her. And he likes you too. I'm here now, and I want to stay if you'll let me." He paused, searching for the right words. "Rachel, I messed up, and I need to tell you what happened to me too." She didn't respond, but she didn't move away either. She just waited, looking at him with those eyes that saw beyond words. "I married someone my family thought was perfect for me. She was a good woman, but she wasn't you." He spoke honestly, without breaking eye contact. "We had a son, and one day she died. An accident. Jack was in the car. He survived, but lost the use of his legs." A heavy silence followed, thick like air before a storm. It was as if the world around them had gone quiet to hear these long-buried confessions. "Ever since then, I felt an emptiness, and when I saw Sophie, and then saw you, I realized the emptiness went back even further than I wanted to admit." Michael didn't try to touch Rachel or move closer. He just let the words linger between them like a fragile bridge over a deep chasm both had helped create. Rachel lowered her gaze, staring at her hands now folded in her lap. Her face showed a swirl of emotions: hurt, understanding, memories, doubts. She couldn't form the tangled feelings into words yet. Michael respected her silence, not pressing or demanding an answer. He knew he had said a lot, maybe too much for a single moment. Some wounds needed time to heal even after being exposed. A soft breeze passed over them, carrying the scent of damp earth and leaves. It was starting to look like rain. Rachel looked up at the overcast sky, then back toward the horizon. She didn't reply immediately, but she didn't stand up, didn't tell him to leave. She simply sat there, side by side with him, in a silence that for the first time wasn't only about pain or bitterness, it carried a hint of acceptance too. The first drops of rain fell, light and scattered. Neither Rachel nor Michael moved to seek shelter. They remained seated, letting the fine drizzle touch them as if it could wash away a bit of the painful past they shared. After some time, minutes or maybe an eternity, Rachel finally moved. Not to pull away, but to look directly at Michael. In her eyes, There was no longer the cold anger of their first meeting, nor the stunned shock of recognizing him. There was something new, complex, impossible to define, maybe the first step toward forgiveness, or at least toward understanding. And for now, that was enough. Rachel opened her eyes before the alarm sounded. Thin beams of sunlight fell through the window curtains, painting golden shapes on the bedroom ceiling. For a few seconds, she lay still, watching that silent dance of light and shadow. Yesterday's conversation with Michael echoed in her mind, what he said, what she said, and everything they had expressed in lingering looks. Surprisingly, she didn't feel the familiar burden that memories often brought. It was as if something inside her had shifted, a stone that had been damming a river, now slowly moving out of the way. Next to her, Sophie slept with her mouth slightly open, her cast resting on the blanket that rose and fell with each gentle breath. Rachel gazed at her daughter, seeing the delicate traits that reminded her of Sophie's absent father. But for the first time, she also saw a bit of Ben, his chin, the faint smile that lingered as he slept. Once, noticing that would have made her cry. Now, a different emotion arose. It wasn't just pain. It was a gentler kind of longing, almost affectionate, as if it was finally possible to remember Ben without falling apart inside. She got up carefully so as not to wake Sophie. It was Saturday, a day the little girl could sleep in. In the small kitchen, Rachel began preparing breakfast. She was almost done mixing the batter for a chocolate cinnamon cake, Sophie's favorite, when she heard light footsteps behind her. "Morning, Mom," Sophie said as she appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes with her good hand. "You're up early." Rachel smiled, bending down to kiss her daughter's forehead. "I wanted to make a special cake," she replied, returning to the batter. "Want to help?" Sophie's eyes sparkled. She loved helping with cakes, even if that mostly meant licking the spoon when they finished. As they worked together, Rachel noticed how much lighter Sophie seemed these days, talking more, laughing more, just more connected to everything around her. Her friendship with Jack had rekindled a spark Rachel feared had been lost 2 years ago. Perhaps it was the best kind of healing, the kind that only another child could bring. The cake was in the oven when the doorbell rang. Sophie hurried off to answer before Rachel could stop her. "Michael, Jack," she squealed from the hallway. Rachel felt a little jolt of surprise. She hadn't expected visitors so early. She quickly took off her apron, smoothed her hair, and went to the door. Michael stood there with Jack in his wheelchair, wearing that slightly hesitant but warm smile Rachel was starting to know well. "Sorry for dropping by so early," he said. Jack really wanted to bring a new game to show Sophie. "We can leave if—" "No, it's fine," Rachel interrupted, surprising even herself. "Come on in." She opened the door wider so Jack's chair could pass. The sweet aroma of baking cake filled the hallway, and Jack took a deep breath. "Wow, something smells great." "Chocolate cake with cinnamon," Sophie announced proudly. "I helped make it." "That's my favorite," Jack exclaimed, giving his dad a pleading look. Michael laughed, an easy, natural laugh Rachel realized she hadn't heard in a very long time. "I guess we'll have to stay and taste it, right?" Rachel nodded, stepping back. "Make yourselves comfortable. It'll be about 20 minutes before it's ready." She paused, then added, "Have you two eaten breakfast? I can make some more if you'd like." "Oh, you don't have to go to any trouble," Michael began, but Jack cut in. "I'm still hungry, Dad." Sophie was already leading Jack into the small but airy living room, where she had spread out her drawings on the floor the night before. "Come see what I drew yesterday. I made a picture of us playing in the park, and one of Michael too." Rachel and Michael found themselves alone in the hallway for a moment. The silence between them wasn't tense anymore. There was a different sort of energy in the air, something neither was ready to name yet. "Coffee?" Rachel asked, breaking the moment. "Yes, please. Thank you." In the small kitchen, while Rachel prepared more coffee and put bread and jam on the table, Michael looked around. The apartment was modest, with simple furniture and older appliances, but every detail revealed care. Homemade curtains stitched with simple embroidery, jars neatly arranged in descending order, a small collection of colorful magnets on the fridge, likely chosen by Sophie. "Your home is so cozy," he said, without the condescending tone some might use to compliment a humble place. Rachel gave him a sidelong glance. "It's small, but it's enough for the two of us," she replied, setting cups on the table. "Sometimes smaller spaces feel more like home," Michael said, sitting where she indicated. "My apartment is large, but it always felt empty." He spoke without self-pity, and it touched something in Rachel. It was the first time he'd talked about himself so frankly, without seeming to apologize or justify. From the other room, they could hear the kids' voices in happy bursts. The clatter of something metallic suggested they were building something together. "They get along well," Rachel observed, sitting down with her own cup of coffee. "Jack never had many friends," Michael replied, a hint of sadness in his tone. "He shut himself off after the accident until Sophie came along." Rachel knew exactly how he felt. Sophie had also closed up after Ben's death. It still felt unfair. Children so young, carrying grown-up pain. The timer beeped, signaling the cake was done. Rachel got up to take it out of the oven while Michael automatically started clearing the empty cups. "I'll wash these," he offered. Rachel hesitated, not used to receiving help. "The sink is over there," she finally said, turning back to flip the cake onto a cooling rack. They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes. Michael washed the dishes efficiently, the same diligence he likely applied at work. Rachel whisked up a chocolate glaze, moving with practiced ease in the tiny kitchen. "That smells incredible," he remarked, watching her drizzle frosting over the cake. Rachel gave a slight, self-conscious smile. "It's my grandma's recipe. Sophie loves it." When the cake was ready, they called the children to the kitchen. Sophie and Jack arrived almost at once, their eyes lighting up at the sight of the dessert. Lunch was improvised but filling. Rachel had only planned for herself and Sophie, but stretched what she had: rice, beans, some sautéed vegetables. Michael remarked he hadn't had such a home-cooked meal in years, not since his housekeeper retired. During the meal, the silence between the adults was filled by the children's chatter and laughter. Sophie talked about her latest school project, a drawing of important people, where she'd included Jack. In turn, Jack described his physical therapy exercises, proudly showing how he could transfer himself from the chair to his bed now. Rachel listened, noticing how Jack's intelligence and creativity complemented Sophie's spirited nature. Meanwhile, Sophie was naturally protective, moving items closer so Jack could reach them, even giving his wheelchair a firm push when needed, an easy partnership that blossomed without self-consciousness. After lunch, while the kids went back to their games, Michael helped Rachel clear the table, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "You don't have to," she started, but he simply smiled. "I want to help. You've done so much already, letting us barge in like this." In the small living room, with the children engrossed in a board game on the rug, Michael approached Rachel, who was organizing some old magazines on a makeshift shelf. "I wanted to ask you something," he said, keeping his voice low so the kids wouldn't hear. "It's about your work." Rachel straightened, suddenly on guard. Michael noticed her tension and hurried on. "I'd like to help, if you'll let me. I have contacts with a project that supports women entrepreneurs, helping with resources, publicity, even training." He spoke sincerely, adding, "You make amazing cakes. You could turn that into a real business." Rachel's instinct was to withdraw. Years of struggling alone had built up walls of self-sufficiency. Accepting help, especially from Michael, made her feel vulnerable in ways she wasn't used to. But something inside her was changing. Maybe she was tired of carrying everything by herself. Maybe she saw how Sophie had bloomed lately in a way she hadn't for 2 years. Or maybe it was just the way Michael looked at her, not pitying, not condescending, but truly recognizing her potential. "I'll think about it," she managed to say at last. Then, with a deliberate effort to lower her guard, she added, "But Thank you for seeing value in what I do. Michael's smile lit his entire face, different from how she remembered it. More serene, less desperate for approval. No rush, he said gently, as if he understood exactly how much was at stake. Anything genuine takes time. In the weeks that followed, the changes were gradual, almost invisible day by day, but significant when looking back. A slow, steady transformation. After much hesitation, Rachel let Michael introduce her to the Women's Entrepreneurship Project. To her surprise, they didn't treat her like a charity case but as a talented professional. The program coordinator, a middle-aged woman with infectious energy, tasted Rachel's cakes and declared that selling them on the street was a waste of her skill. In less than a month, Rachel began supplying cakes and pastries to the cafeteria of a private school in the area, a small but meaningful contract that paid more than her street sales and gave her a more stable, respectable working environment. With a steadier income, she could finally rent a better home, still modest, but with 2 bedrooms and a small porch where Sophie could play safely. It was only a few blocks from their old place, allowing Sophie to stay at the same school and keep her small circle of friends. The new house brought fresh energy to both mother and daughter. Sophie got a new mattress, colorful curtains for her room, and a special corner for all her art supplies. Rachel felt relieved not to have to wake up before dawn to bake dozens of cakes she would carry around for hours. Michael and Jack became frequent visitors. At first, they only came on weekends. Then they started dropping by during the week too, sometimes just for a quick snack after Jack's school, sometimes for impromptu dinners, followed by board games or made-up stories from the children. Sophie and Jack grew inseparable. She was energetic and protective, pushing his wheelchair in the little park nearby and inventing games he could fully participate in, fiercely defending him whenever other kids asked rude questions about his disability. He was patient and creative, teaching her card games, helping her with math homework, spinning fantasy tales of their imaginary adventures. Rachel watched their friendship blossom with a mix of joy and apprehension. She worried Sophie might get too attached, that she'd suffer if Michael and Jack ever disappeared. But then she saw the sparkle in Sophie's eyes and heard her genuine laughter, and Rachel couldn't bring herself to interfere. As for her and Michael, something undefinable was shifting. It wasn't a rekindled romance. They both had too many scars for that. But it was a deeper connection built on mutual recognition of past mistakes and an understanding of the pain each carried. One particularly pleasant afternoon, while the kids played in the small backyard, Michael helped Sophie assemble a new beanbag chair he'd brought for her room. Rachel watched from the kitchen window, smiling discreetly at how patiently he explained each step, and at Sophie's serious focus as she followed instructions. Later, after a snack of sandwiches and cake, they all gathered in the living room to listen to a story Sophie had made up. It was an elaborate tale of a distant kingdom where children with magical powers helped adults find lost things. Jack provided voices for each character, drawing laughter from everyone. Michael, sitting on the floor with his back against the couch, had a light in his eyes Rachel hadn't seen in years. She herself felt the weight of so many difficult days ease as she allowed herself to be pulled into the children's imaginative world. When the story ended, Sophie looked at all 4 of them seated in a circle in the small living room and asked, in that wonderfully direct way 5-year-olds do, "Are we like a family now?" A hush fell over the group. It wasn't awkward or uncomfortable, just heavy with all the unspoken possibilities. Michael looked at Rachel. Rachel looked at Michael. Something passed between them, a silent communication, a mutual understanding that went beyond words. And for the first time, neither of them answered with explanations or evasions. They both just smiled, a shared smile that contained no grand promises or dramatic declarations, but something even more valuable, the possibility of a future they could build slowly, day by day, with care and patience. A smile that said, without words, that some stories don't end when you think they do. Sometimes they simply pause, take a deep breath and start again in a different way. Mature, stronger, more genuine. The news reached the Thompson family like a sly whisper. First, Edward Thompson's secretary spotted Michael entering a bakery with a woman and 2 children, one in a wheelchair. Then a cousin ran into him at a park, where he was pushing Jack's wheelchair while a little girl ran ahead, and a dark-haired woman strolled alongside him. The information circulated through the family's usual channels, discreet phone calls, text messages feigning concern, until it finally reached the ears of Edward and Caroline Thompson. When Michael received his mother's message, actually summoning him to Sunday dinner at the family home, he knew exactly what it was about. Being invited to a family dinner wasn't unusual, but the tone of the message and the insistence that he absolutely must come this time made it clear something had changed. That Sunday morning, as he dressed for the gathering, Michael felt an odd calmness. There was a time when facing his family would have filled him with anxiety, fear of disappointing them, guilt. But he was different now. Maybe it was the afternoons he spent with Rachel and the kids. Maybe it was the laughter he heard from Jack these days, something he'd barely heard since the accident. Or maybe it was simply the course of a man who had been lost for too long but was now finding his way back. "Will you be gone long, Dad?" Jack asked, watching Michael adjust his tie in the bedroom mirror. "Just a few hours, buddy," Michael answered, turning to his son with a smile. "Mrs. Johnson will stay with you, and I'll be back in time to read your story before bed." "We're not going to see Sophie today?" The disappointment in Jack's voice was palpable. Michael knelt by the bed so he could meet Jack's eyes. "Not today. But I promise we'll go tomorrow, okay?" Jack's face lit up at that promise. Michael felt a surge of protectiveness and a new sense of resolve that had been growing in him. His son was happier in these past weeks than he'd been in all the time since his mother's death. Sophie and Rachel had brought light back into their lives, a light Michael hadn't realized was missing until it returned. He wouldn't let that light go out. Not again. The Thompson mansion was in an upscale neighborhood, behind high walls and automatic gates. Michael parked in the circular drive, eyeing the grand facade of the house where he'd grown up. Somehow it looked smaller now, less intimidating than in his memories. The housekeeper opened the door, greeting him with the usual formality. From the foyer, he could hear voices coming from the dining room, more voices than he'd expected. Clearly, this wasn't going to be just dinner with the parents. Entering the room confirmed his suspicion. Besides Edward and Caroline, his older brother Robert was there with his impeccably dressed and reserved wife, his sister Eliza, always their father's favorite, and even Uncle Philip, Caroline's brother and one of the family business's oldest partners. "Michael, at last," Caroline said, standing up to give him dutiful kisses on both cheeks. "We were starting to think you wouldn't come." "Sorry I'm late," Michael replied, greeting each person in turn. "I didn't realize we were having a full family gathering." "Oh, it's not a gathering," Edward said in his deep, authoritative voice that filled the room. "Just a dinner, son. Have a seat," Michael complied, taking his usual seat at the lavishly set table. The housekeeper served the first course, vegetable consomme that he barely touched. A thick silence settled, laden with expectations and unspoken tension. Robert was the one who finally addressed the elephant in the room. "So, Michael, I heard you've been spending time in a rather interesting neighborhood lately." Michael kept his face impassive, taking a small sip of water before answering. "If by interesting you mean the neighborhood where my friends live, then yes, I've been there often." "Friends?" Caroline asked in that falsely innocent tone he knew too well. "What kind of friends, dear?" Michael set his napkin beside his plate, looking directly at his mother. "A woman named Rachel and her daughter, Sophie. Her little girl saved Jack from an accident a few weeks ago. We've been spending time together since." The name Rachel dropped like a stone into the calm waters of the family dinner. Edward and Caroline exchanged knowing looks. Robert let out an exasperated sigh. Eliza seemed genuinely puzzled. "It can't be the same Rachel," Caroline began, but Edward cut her off. "It's exactly who you think it is," he said, fixing Michael with a steely glare. Isn't it, son? Michael held his father's gaze, refusing to back down. Yes. It's the same Rachel I was with 10 years ago, the one you convinced me to leave. Another silence fell, broken only by the soft clink of cutlery on porcelain as the housekeeper cleared the soup bowls. Michael felt the weight of everyone's stares, his father's barely veiled anger, his mother's alarm, his siblings' confusion, even Uncle Philip's disapproval. Michael, Edward said once they were alone again, I thought we'd put that phase behind us a long time ago. You did the right thing, distancing yourself from that girl. You made a good marriage, built a respectable family. And look where that led me, Dad, Michael countered, his calm voice betraying the storm within. Catherine's gone. Jack is in a wheelchair. And me, I spent years trying to fill a void that started when I left Rachel. Caroline clutched her chest, as though her son's words had physically hurt her. Michael, how can you say that? Are you implying Jack's accident was some kind of punishment? No, Mother. I'm saying life doesn't follow the perfect script you and Dad wrote for me. Maybe, just maybe, I should have trusted my own instincts 10 years ago, Robert interjected with that condescending tone Michael remembered from childhood. Let's be realistic. This woman, this Rachel, she's going to use you again. She's probably struggling financially, saw an opportunity when her daughter met Jack, and now she's just playing the situation. Robert is right, Uncle Philip added, speaking for the first time. People like her always have an angle, Michael. Always looking for an advantage. Michael looked around the table, at his family, the people who should support him, understand him, love him no matter what. Yet all he saw were strangers, confined by their narrow worldview, unable to see beyond their privileged circle. You don't know her, he finally said, his voice low but steady. You never did. Rachel's had every chance to ask for my help from day one. And guess what she did? She refused it. She shut the door in my face. She kept working, like she always has. Edward made a sound of disdain. And now she's finally letting you in. How convenient, don't you think? That was the final straw. That... Michael pushed back his chair and stood, palms pressed flat against the table. You were the ones who tore me away from her, and I let you. His words hung in the air, a confession long overdue. Michael looked at his father, his mother, and each person present, not with fury, but with a clarity that only comes when you see the full truth at last. I was young and insecure, and I believed you when you said she only wanted the family's money. I believed you when you implied she wouldn't make a good wife or a good mother. His voice was firm. And do you know what I've discovered? Rachel raised 2 kids on her own. When one of them died in an accident, she didn't crumble. She worked day and night, selling cakes on the street to support her daughter. Not once has she used our past to ask anything of me. Caroline stood too, extending her hand toward her son in a pleading gesture. Michael, dear, you're confused. This woman, she has a name, Mother, Rachel. And she has more integrity and strength than anyone at this table, myself included. Edward slammed his fist on the table, making the glasses rattle. That's enough, Michael. I won't tolerate this kind of behavior under my roof. You have obligations to this family, to our company. No, Dad. Michael headed for the door, stopping only to turn back one last time. I have obligations to my son, to my heart, and to the people who actually care about me, not about what I stand for or how they can mold me. The break was unmistakable. Michael saw it in his father's eyes, a line crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. He was choosing a path outside the one the Thompson family had mapped out for him since birth. If you walk out that door now, Edward threatened, his face red with fury. Don't bother coming back. Michael smiled, not with contempt or anger, but with a quiet serenity he'd never felt before. I don't think I was ever really here to begin with, Dad. Not truly. The sound of the dining room door closing behind him echoed like a period at the end of a sentence far too long. In the foyer, the housekeeper stared at him in surprise as he left so soon. Michael simply gave her a courteous nod and kept walking. The cool night air greeted him as he stepped out of the mansion. He inhaled deeply, filling his lungs as if it were his first real breath. In a way, it was a wave of freedom washed over him. Not the freedom to do whatever he wanted, but the fundamental freedom to be who he really was. He got into his car and drove away. Without hesitation, without doubt, he steered toward Rachel's house. He hadn't planned on visiting her tonight, but now it was the only place he wanted to be, the only place that felt like home. The confrontation with his family, a moment that once would have left him shattered, now seemed more like a necessary step on a bigger journey. A journey back home, not the home he grew up in, but the one he found in Sophie's grin, in Jack's hugs, in Rachel's eyes. As he drove through the city, streetlights illuminating his path like guiding stars, Michael felt a certainty he'd never experienced. He was moving forward, and this time, he wasn't looking back. 6 months had passed since that day on the little porch, when Rachel and Michael took that first step together. An entire season had changed, taking old leaves with it and bringing fresh beginnings. Time, that silent craftsman, had worked gently, healing wounds and building bridges over gaps once thought impossible to cross. The new house was in a peaceful neighborhood, not too fancy, not too humble. A place where children played on sidewalks in the summertime and neighbors exchanged friendly hellos in the morning. The freshly painted walls in soft shades of blue and cream reflected the sunlight streaming through wide windows. Each room had been chosen with care, each piece of furniture placed not just for function but for meaning. The kitchen was the heart of the home, spacious enough for Rachel to bake her cakes and pastries, which she now supplied to 3 local cafes, as well as special orders for events. The sweet smell of cinnamon and vanilla lingered in the air, blending with the scent of fresh flowers Rachel kept in a colorful vase on the table. On this particular Sunday afternoon, Sophie and Jack were playing in the backyard. Their laughter carried through the open windows, filling the house with an energy neither Rachel nor Michael had imagined they'd feel again. Jack, though still in a wheelchair, navigated the paved path Michael had built for him with remarkable speed. Sophie ran alongside, sometimes pushing his chair in extreme races that made the adults' hearts leap, but they never interfered. At one corner of the yard, Rachel had created a small garden. Pots of various sizes displayed colorful flowers and a few herbs. It was her place of peace, where she worked on weekend mornings with Michael, quietly keeping her company, occasionally glancing up from his book to admire her. "They're so happy," Rachel remarked, watching the children through the kitchen window as she put the finishing touches on an orange cake. Michael stepped closer, standing beside her. "You look happy too," he said, noticing the glow in her eyes and the lightness in her movements. Rachel smiled, letting herself savor the simple truth of his words. "I am," she replied simply. They didn't live together, not officially. Michael and Jack still had their own apartment a few blocks away, but they spent so much time at Rachel's new house that the distinction felt almost symbolic. A necessary formality, though, respecting the careful pace they'd set. No rushing, building trust one brick at a time. The doorbell rang, cutting the moment short. Michael went to answer it, returning with a box of children's books and a basket of fresh fruit. "Special delivery," he joked. "Books for the kids' little library and fruit for tomorrow's cake." Rachel watched him set the basket on the counter. It was such a simple gesture, bringing books, fruit, sometimes flowers, but it was filled with a kind of attentiveness she had never experienced before. They weren't expensive or grandiose gifts, just small signs that he was always thinking of them. "Thank you," she said, placing a light hand on his arm. "I think it's time to call the kids in for a snack. The sky's starting to change color." Michael nodded and headed into the backyard. Minutes later, the children barreled inside like a whirlwind of noise and excitement. Sophie, now with her arm fully healed, was clutching a sheet of paper. Jack wheeled himself inside with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of the place. "Mom, Michael, we made a super important drawing," Sophie announced, her eyes shining. Let's go to the front porch, Rachel suggested. The cake's ready, and you can show us your picture while we eat. The little front porch had become their favorite gathering spot. With a round table, comfy chairs, and hanging plants, it offered a cozy view of the neighborhood's quiet street. Rachel served the cake with juice for the kids and coffee for her and Michael. The sun was starting its descent, coloring the sky with warm orange and pink hues. The golden light washed over them, creating soft shadows and brightening their smiles. Michael recounted a childhood story of when he tried building a treehouse, only to learn the hard way he had zero woodworking skills. Falling out of the tree wasn't even the worst part, he said, laughing. It was when my dad found me covered in mud, surrounded by broken boards. Sophie laughed so hard her eyes closed. Jack clapped his hands, demanding more details. Rachel listened with a serene smile. There was a feeling there that no one needed to label, but they all felt it. Belonging. Being exactly where they should be, with exactly whom they should be. When the story ended, Sophie remembered the drawing. She carefully lifted it from the table and held it out, beaming, "Look what Jack and I made." The drawing, made in bright markers, showed 4 people holding hands, 2 adults and 2 children. There was also a brown dog beside them, a big tree with red fruits, and a house with open windows that had little music notes floating out. "That's us," Sophie explained, pointing to each figure. "Me, Jack, Mom, and Michael. And that's Sparky, the dog we don't have yet but will someday." She turned serious. "So now everything's complete." Rachel felt her chest tighten, not with pain but with a surge of emotion she could barely contain. She looked at Michael and saw her own feelings reflected in his eyes. He reached across the table and took her hand calmly. Their fingers interlaced naturally. As if they were meant to fit, they said nothing because there was no need. Jack studied the drawing with satisfaction. "Can we hang it on the living room wall?" he asked. "Of course," Rachel said softly. "It'll look perfect there." The sun continued to sink, bathing the porch in warm light that felt like a blessing on the moment. A gentle breeze ruffled the hanging plants, sending shifting shadows dancing across the wooden floor. Sitting together under the ever-changing sky, something crystallized in the air, a shared certainty that couldn't be put into words. The past couldn't be altered, but the present had been accepted in all its beauty and flaws, and the future, after so long, felt light, brimming with possibilities that no longer frightened them but invited them forward. Later that evening, after the children were in bed and Michael was preparing to head back to his apartment, Rachel walked him to the door. The night was calm and filled with starlight. "Thank you for today," she said, leaning against the doorframe. Michael smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes, one she was learning to love all over again. "You know you don't have to thank me." For a moment, they just stood there looking at each other. There was a lot to say, yet everything had already been said in the silence they shared. "See you tomorrow," he asked, though it sounded more like a statement than a question. "See you tomorrow," Rachel agreed. As Michael walked away down the lamplit sidewalk, Rachel watched him for a few extra seconds before closing the door. Back in the living room, her gaze drifted to Sophie and Jack's drawing, now framed and hanging on the main wall. "Now everything's complete," Sophie's words echoed in her mind. In a way, it was. This family born of pain was now flourishing through kindness. Not the family they once imagined, neither Rachel's vision of life with Ben and Sophie, nor Michael's vision of life with Catherine and Jack. It was something else, something better, something real, conscious, chosen, day after day, perhaps precisely because of the scars that remained. A family that knew the value of what it had, because it knew what it meant to lose. A family that took nothing for granted, building their path day by day, one brick at a time, one smile at a time. A family reborn from the ashes, like a phoenix from the stories Michael read to the kids before bed. Stronger, wiser, more genuine.